Well, that's right. So the recording has started, and I'm going to keep an eye out. I'm on the road today. I'm traveling to beautiful, sunny, crisp, clean Edmonton, Alberta, from home in Calgary. And for Carmen, who's got a son who's a hockey fan, there's a rivalry between Calgary and Edmonton that probably takes on any U.S. college football rivalry, where we gently and respectfully hate each other's town because of their hockey team. But I'm up here and they haven't thrown me out yet, so maybe they don't know.
Well, then I'll have to wave when I drive by because I'm driving up there this afternoon.
Oh, yeah, you're here till tomorrow night, so yeah. So anyway, so we're here and we're on, I think actually it's our 6th session of the Better Leader Inner Circle. We have 62 people that registered and a small but mighty team here live and in person. And I thought for this particular session that we would take a look at some of the things that we've talked about and learned about and gather the wisdom of the crowd on what to do when we bump into some things that are pretty unique. So what we're going to do 3 short 15-20 minute case studies this morning, and we'll get people talking about it and thinking and what's the best solution. All of these have been examples that I've bumped into either in my coaching or consulting with my clients, and some of them are fun and some of them are a little challenging. And we often look at these things sorry, here, just go back. So we're going to call them the mysteries, romance, and adventure section of the Better Leader Inner Circle. And a great quote that I've paraphrased and used many times, but Otto von Bismarck says, "Only a fool learns from his own mistakes, but a wise man learns from the mistakes of others." So I think that's something we can just put in our pocket, and we often see these things, right? When we're traveling around and walking around and doing our work, and you look down the hall and you see somebody making a decision or making a comment, and you think, "Whoa, I put that in my little basket of things never to do, or I should follow that." And just like our kids, people learn from watching us as leaders, and as leaders, we should try to always to learn from the examples of others. So we got these 3 things, and we're not going to waste a lot of time this morning. We got some. Carmen is new to the club for today, but we have other people online, and we're just going to jump right into this. And it's a small group, so we're not going to do breakouts. We'll just have a facilitated conversation amongst us, but what we think. So the first conversation was the case of the do-it-yourself manager, and I think we've often bumped into these things, and maybe we've even been guilty of it yourself. I know I've likely said it, why should I give it to somebody else when I can do it just as quick on my own instead of delegating it away or giving it to somebody else. So we're going to take a look at poor old Joanne, who is super capable and enthusiastic professional in a sales organization, actually, if I recall right, where Joanne was working, not her real name, of course. And she was promoted to manage this group of professionals. So she had 5 people that were doing the work that she was doing in past. And as she got into that, she thought, well, I obviously was promoted because I'm an excellent salesperson and I'm squared away, this is what put me into this position to be successful. And sometimes we often think this, well, I have a greater expertise than the people I'm reporting to, so why shouldn't I just do it? The work will be done better and faster, and I'll train them when they have time, and they'll learn by osmosis when they watch me be so great. And so I want to get concentrated. I'm being measured here. I'm on that horrible situation that many of us get put in when we get promoted into being on probation. And of course, you're a little bit scared that you're going to fail, lose your job, and get kicked to the curb and go home to your husband or wife and kids and say that it didn't work out. So the drive and the incentive for us to be successful is high, and that creates, unfortunately, a sense of fear often. So what she was starting to do was not pass on assignments, and she ended up doing most of the work herself. And she worked herself crazy, to be perfectly honest. She isolated herself from those around her, especially her peers and her supervisor, not her supervisor. Sorry for the typo. And then that, we've talked about those that have been in the group for a while. We've talked about the model that Patrick Lencioni uses about the first team being that triangle of people with your peers at the bottom with you and your boss as being this organization. And she was pulling out of that triangle and pulling down and focusing on her own work. But at the same time, she was isolating herself from her own team. So now she's all by herself. She's a small island in a big sea. People started to leave the organization or her team because why? Well, they weren't getting anything interesting to do. They weren't being employed. They weren't being engaged. They were being disconnected. And unfortunately, too, they were being disconnected from the global team. And so it was not a very healthy thing. And of course, she was too busy to realize what was happening and also too busy trying to do all this work by herself that she didn't even replace the person for ages and didn't have to take the time to jump through those hoops. So about 60 days into this exercise, she got called in for a performance review. And if you were a supervisor, what would you have said? How would you even approach this conversation? In fact, I would even step back one step. Like, if as her supervisor, what would you consider doing and thinking about this position and this person who obviously had tools and competencies, but was also equally struggling in her role? What do you think?
Well, I'm going to chime in. Can you go back a slide there for a second?
Yeah, for sure. Which one? This one?
The first one. Because when you sent this out the other day, oh, maybe it's one more. Was it one more? There's a sentence where it says Joanne assumed or something of that nature, where it was her skills got her promoted.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah,
I was promoted because of my excellent performance.
Mm-hmm.
Right away. I'm like,
yeah.
Are you sure? Like,
sure?
That's a big assumption. and maybe it's because I come from a background of seeing people get promoted for different reasons than performance. Yeah. I had that in the back of my head where I related to a lot of the stuff that, you put in the case study here. And so when you got to the question of what would the supervisor say, I was wondering, like, well, is the supervisor coming to a position of thanks for filling that void, right? But I got some concerns. Or was it, hey, this isn't meeting the expectations we had when we promoted you, right? So I guess that was just kind of the two mindsets that I had when I was playing the role in my head of supervisor.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah. Well, we've talked about this in the inner circle before, right? It's like people often get promoted because they're really good at their jobs. They are the best carpenter, or they are the best accountant, or they're, yeah. And then they get promoted in this thing when, quite frankly, those have been around for a while. I've heard me say this with lots, right? It's like, it's not a promotion, it's a new job. You should be considered a new career, not just a promotion, right? So I think she was. So what do you think about the supervisor right from the very beginning? Let's not even step back, like day one, the first few weeks when Joanne got this job, like, where was that person?
Yeah. Right. And where was that sense of like, hey, we put you in this role to accomplish, like you said, something like it's a new job. So there should be some new things that need accomplishing for Joanne. And she's filling her time doing old things, right? The same thing.
Yeah.
So what's happened to the new work, right? I sort of picture it like if it's a new job, it probably had specific deliverables. And how are those getting done if she was doing her old job pretty much?
Right. So, right. Go ahead, Carmen. Yeah, you have something yet?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think one of the very first things, well, there's lots of assumptions we can put into this, but how good are the job descriptions, right? Did we, as we were talking about the promotion, I mean, did we tell her why? Why was she chosen for the promotion as opposed to someone else? And then I like to clearly separate what makes this role different than what she was doing before. Like how much more or less or different are we really talking about? And drawing, kind of how do we get there? I usually have curriculum plans for each of my leaders. And so what does this development plan need to look like to get from where they are today to the leader that this new promotion is going to take? And really highlighting and honing in on, these are the things that are different. This is what I'm going to be looking at. These are your different KPIs than they were as an individual contributor, right? Things of that nature.
Yeah, exactly. So she was, quite frankly, set up for failure. like
Exactly.
like this poor soul was thrown into the deep end and barely given a life preserver, and so she was trying to make it up on her own.
Yeah.
And
Definitely didn't feel like a team. You
Yeah.
made the comment that she was becoming a small island in a big sea, and you
Right.
got to wonder, it wasn't all by choice, right? If there was nobody above her saying success looks like this, or deliverables include this, not only are you an island, you're like adrift, right?
Yeah. Well, she's at risk of losing her job right about now, right? If somebody's having this conversation 60 days in and they haven't talked to you, it's going to be a huge shock to her, right? Because she walked into this meeting thinking she was doing a great job.
Because she was doing all the job.
Yeah, right. So she was. So
my guess is control issues, right? She either
Yeah.
doesn't trust her team. To your point on Patrick Lencioni, there's probably a trust factor there. But there's a lot of tactical things too that she could do as a supervisor that I would do. So I have a method we use called do it, delegate it, delete it. Right. And so everything that comes in, or let's say in this case, the first thing I wouldn't have waited 60 days, but I would sit her down and say, let's pull up your calendar. Let's pull up your meetings for the week. Let's pull up the activities on your list, and let's start categorizing them. Are you going to do them because you can do them right away and it's faster for you to do them than anyone else? Are you going to delegate them? If so, who and how? Or is it not even worth doing and we're going to delete it? Right. Because today's world, I find we're really good at making up work.
Yeah. We're all day busy, not busy all day.
Really busy, right? And I try to make sure that my leaders understand. I don't care. I don't ever want you to be busy for the sake of being busy. I want you to be productive, right?
Exactly.
So that's just one thing that I have found it resonates very well with and with just different either leaders or even I do a lot of mentoring. So with a lot of leaders that I'm mentoring, that whole do it, delegate, delete, we call it the 3Ds. Just really stop and trust yourself and figure out what is it that I need to do. And then that will really clearly show you if you find you can't delegate anything, then there's a bigger problem, right?
Well, too, and I think there was a post I just said this weekend or last weekend. There's a post around delegation, right? Like you need to understand the most valuable work for you to do as a leader, as a supervisor or a team member, whatever it is. And then like you said, Carmen, in a way is like, okay, this is what I got to do. This is the stuff that's moving me towards success, and the rest I need to give it away some way. And but this actually was an indication of a larger problem within the organization. This particular group had, several silos. Some were high performing, and then this one was. So this was an indication of leadership from a higher level, a failure of leadership from a higher level within that particular team, right? And one of the things, just so as an interesting side note on this particular case, was that this was a sort of a the guys on the side of the room that nobody really wanted to talk about and acknowledge. And so the organization as a whole didn't invest in the sales and marketing side. They were more interested in their core business, which was engineering. So it was kind of set up for, well, not kind of, it was truly, she was set up for not for success at all. And it reflected badly in the whole organization. Luckily, we were able to save poor Joanne, and we were able to give her an opportunity to go get some education and some mentorship. And there was a change of leadership within that particular department because to create an opportunity for success, not just for Joanne. These 5 people that work for Joanne.
Yeah.
And there was 2 or 3 teams like that in this organization.
I think that one thing that gets overlooked, and especially in this instance, we're using the word supervisor, which I don't mind, but I think it's also when you think about leader, sometimes you're delegating the opportunity to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gets neglected as something when you're looking at your to-do list. Mm-hmm. Just because you can doesn't mean that somebody else also can't. right? Like, I think that that's an important one. And I've taken it to heart as of late is I can do it. Yeah. But it would be nice if somebody else could as well. And so I'm going to delegate learning to that person. And so this task is going to give them an opportunity to learn to do something, which will help them down the road too. But right now, clearing up a bit of space, getting another person with a skill set in a small team, you know? And so I think that we often, I love that. And I wrote it down, do it, delegate it, delete it. I think in the delegate, we just want to be like, make sure it's not always just black and white, like I can or I can't kind of thing.
Sure.
But,
Right.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
but I like that little mantra. But
Well,
I think sometimes it's like delegate for, not for like today's to-dos, but this could alleviate a to-do list down the road.
Oh, for sure. And imagine the core capacity of the team that you're developing, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody is better and the whole organization becomes better because you are developing. In the military and the Army in particular, there's this language around, you know, your supervisor's job intimately and you know the next levels, you're familiar with the next level. So when somebody goes on leave, like when in this case, if Joanne was tagged for promotion early enough in the organization, or as a potential of somebody with some high potential, you know, she should have been given the opportunity to be the acting team lead when somebody went on vacation or on course, or even just for the day. So like she got her feet wet and got to start to understand, and then was allowed to go on development courses, either internal or external, or you know, to go to a community college or something like that, where you could get some extra developmental training, so that when the opportunity arose to be get the role, you know, you're already kind of halfway there before you get promoted.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. And we do this all the time,
so that
right?
it's not a new job, right? So that
Yes.
it's a job that they are familiar with, I
Yeah.
think is our opportunity as leaders, is to build the next one.
Yeah, keep
Not to
them
hoard it.
within a good balance of their comfort zone, right? Because
Yeah.
then they will perform better. And it's just the natural instinct to default to your strengths or back
Yeah.
to your comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
When you're
Yeah.
getting stretched. So
That's right.
helping them sort of just taking those baby steps. One other tactic I've used is to ask, you know, Joanne, why don't you spend some time reflecting on what are all the accomplishments you've made in these last 60 days? What do you think are the accomplishments that you've made? Because it is always so telling on how they are seeing and approaching the work and what they think good looks like.
Right.
Right.
I like
And
that.
and you can very quickly figure out you're just not aligned, right? And because it may very well be that what she was doing was good, but it isn't the result that you were trying to achieve together. And so but then what you can do is again close those gaps in a really constructive and still positive conversation, you know, where you're not having to constantly criticize or critique. You're basically just showing the difference of here's what we were looking for. Here's all the great things you did. So now look, now all we have to do is kind of close that gap. And so it becomes much more manageable, I think, for them to see where they are, where we want them to be, and then we can work together on steps to get there. And to your point, it's a way to give them baby steps and keep them kind of in that comfort zone. But it'll also tell you, is the strategic thinking there or not? Like, are they super tactical? And so they just got to check a box all the time. I find that a lot. Or not, or maybe they're missing the tactical. Like I have some really just, you know, brainiacs out there that are like, hey, I thought somebody else would pick that up. And you kind of go, well, hang on a second, because
did they know and who and what? Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, it's super. Well, you know, my little mantra in life has been like the world is full of failed site superintendents that used to be perfectly good carpenters, right?
Exactly.
And to your point, Carmen, like when you're under stress, you go where you're comfortable. So if somebody's under pressure, in that sort of setting of a construction site, who does that site superintendent go and torture at the carpenters, right?
Yep.
Because they know that job, right? And they're going to that person, and then they become that micromanager from hell that you don't even want to acknowledge. We've all probably bumped into that person, as opposed to the delegator with support and authority. Yeah, great conversation. So I'm going to slide on to the next case, and we're going to build On to the minute. So the case of the poor culture, while employees are working miles apart, and this is a reality. I know for some people that are part of the inner circle, and I know it's a reality for lots of people in life about certainly since COVID, but even before that, where this culture of a strong culture is difficult. But now we got people spread all over, not just the city or region, but across the country and time zones, and maybe even around the world. So this again was an engineering firm. It was different. This electrical engineering firm whose team was about 20 folks, and the contractors. And they were hundreds of miles apart, and they were the head office was in Virginia, and they had people spread across the United States, across different states. And it was difficult to get to know each other. They had a strong, tight team that was quite bonded prior to COVID, and they were organized. And you got to know each other. They were friends and friendly, and they got to know each other really well. And they built this culture that was tight and strong. But as they diversed or dispersed through COVID, they hired in some new people that were not part of the original tight team, and now you've got this two-dimensional or even one-dimensional person that's showing up on a screen who you don't know, who wasn't in on all the inside jokes and the subtle ways of culture that the organization worked on. And they were spread out all over, and it became very hard for them to work together. Even to understand the organization's culture was tough for these people because they were spread out. Imagine being the new person to show up bump into this tight team of people that knew each other so well. To be fair, they did work hard at bridging the culture, and they used technology to try to communicate better with everybody, and they had started investing in quarterly, bringing everyone together at some expense, but I think it was a good investment to bring people together, at least quarterly. But they started slipping further apart. They started becoming not just a dispersed team, but a disparate team. And so what would you have done? Well, was it time to bring somebody in? What could you do with your own team? What was the role of leadership in this exercise? How do you think that if we were brought in or asked for advice on this particular case, what would we start to do? I know for sure, Nicole, you have a dispersed team. I would expect probably Carmen, you do too. I think Morgan's quite lucky to have her team pretty well all in one building, although I know there's some offsite supervision there too.
I mean, so I would say I've lived this for the past couple of years on and off, right? I think there's lots of answers to these questions for one thing, but first thing is really for us, for me personally, it's cultural, right? I'm in India, I'm in Canada, I'm in the US, I'm in the Philippines, we're in Portugal, we're in Argentina. Like and those are very different cultural personalities for one thing. So one of the first things that I like to do is just spend time with my teams, particularly my leaders. And then my hope is always that they will cascade it down to their organizations, doing some true physical cultural training, right? Like let's learn what are the holidays in Manila versus India versus the US, right? Like really trying to get everybody to understand more about the cultures that they're working with. So that they understand a lot of times where either resistance could be coming from or different opinions are coming from. I also am very careful with balancing on camera time. But there are certain meetings where I say, look, the whole point of this meeting is relationship building, and I don't think we ever spend enough time relationship building.
Right.
And so I say, if you're going to come to the meeting, I want you on camera. I understand there are exceptions. I get it. I have my own exception days. We all do. But once a week on Wednesdays, middle of the week, I want you on camera. And the biggest reason is because I want to try to watch body language and I want to see facial expressions. And that to me is the best way. And to be quite honest, I still have in Manila, I still have 4 leaders who will not come on camera ever. And we meet every single Wednesday.
Wowzers.
So it's one of those things. Now, what I will say is they also never said a word the first probably 6 weeks that the meetings were going on. And now they are contributing. and still not on camera. So I'm still working on them, still trying to figure out, what's up with that. Like, I just don't understand it. I'll ping each one kind of individually at times and say, it would really mean a lot to me if you would just plan for this one meeting to be on camera. I know it's a big ask, but I'd really appreciate it if you would do it. So it's always interesting. And then, their leader will always give me the reasons why they're just not comfortable, I don't know. But I think as leaders, I think my role is to assume positive intent always and to be a role model. So I'm on camera, right? If I'm expecting others to be on camera, I'm on camera. And then just really try to encourage and try to seek to understand. And so I try to bring a lot of curiosity to those meetings, but also allow them to sort of run it. Like, I don't set the agenda anymore. I have another leader that goes out and tallies up the topics for that agenda for that week. And that's the meeting Steve was talking about. I'm about to kick off a book study in, because I started thinking maybe if we would kick off a book study, I could pull out a little more personality, right? But to be honest, that is not a status meeting. It is honestly my attempt at relationship building across my extended leadership team. That's all it is. 1 hour on Wednesdays.
Great idea. Nicole, Mark, do you have anything to?
I was just going to say the one thing that I have really implemented, and I've only experienced remote work with COVID, and it will stay that way because we are in 2 provinces here in Canada province. So I'll always have a remote team from me. Like, they may be physically all in the same office, but it's not my office. So the one thing that I decided right from the get-go was, before every team meeting was the people part. So the agenda includes connecting with my colleagues, as people, right? So, and there was sometimes for the first couple, it was like super static questions like, hey, so did anyone see this sports TV movie, something, right? And I think it goes to what Carmen was saying about like relationship building. So our agenda was not always task driven, but it was, hey, did you last week you couldn't come because you had your car in the shop, just wanted to check and make sure your car still runs, kind of thing. And so I was making sure that I was connecting with the people that I worked with, and then we talked about the work. So that was the one thing that was really important to me to every meeting. And actually my boss saw it, and so now he sort of implemented that, in staff meetings. The round table that we use to kick off is no longer about tasks. It's about personal, like, hey, I'm sorry I missed last time. I was on vacation and I did this kind of thing. So like, we're only 20 people across 2 provinces. So we can quickly go around a table and make sure that everybody knows everybody's name and everybody is well, kind of thing. So that was the thing that I took about the using the tech to connect as opposed to conduct. It wasn't about having a meeting. It was about connecting with the people that I don't get to actually see.
Morgan, do you have anything you wanted?
No, we're all in the office most days, working really close together. So I don't really have anything to add about online distance work.
One thing that I will share that I to sort of reiterate, because I had come from an environment where I'd always worked with my team in the very, very beginnings of COVID, when everyone was just like uncertain and stuff. I had a girl that was a lady that was my peer, same position, but in 2 different centers. And twice a week, we would actually just turn Zoom on and have it on. So it was like we were sitting next to somebody. And we'd put it on mute if we had to take a phone call or stuff. But then we had a bit more of that organic, like, quick question, how do you spell something, right? Like,
that's a great idea.
Like, she was in her basement and I was in my kitchen table, and it was just so that you had another noise, right? Like, you had
mimicking as if you were in office together, right? Like, that's what you would have done. You would have turned around in your cube, right? And you would have asked a question. I do that with some of my team. Not everybody likes it, but when we're in big projects and we're on tight timelines, I always say, I want a working room. get the working room
Yeah.
up and running,
Yep.
and everybody's just on. You can, if you
I
need
really
to
like
eat
it.
or do something, you can go off camera for a second, right? But when you
Yeah.
come back, I want you to be there. So
Yeah,
So
and I
what-
get that you're gonna take a call or whatever it might
Yeah.
be, but I think that was just and I'd never met, like I started my position in COVID. My interviews were Zoom. My letter of offer was like everything.
right.
I'd never met my team for almost a full year.
Wowzers.
So I had to overdo it in terms of building relationships because they were all strangers. And so that was some of what we did, was just like, hey, like sometimes I'd be like, can you jump on for tea? Like a cup of tea at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday was kind of just fun. There was no agenda. It was like, I'm going to have tea. Like I would have at the office, I would have gone to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. So we would just always put it out there.
Yeah, we did like I recommended for these guys, because one of my big things when I took over a team a number of years ago was it wasn't mandatory, but it was super encouraged, and eventually people just started showing up because we made it worthwhile, was like the lunchroom thing, right? Eating together. And one of the things that we did in this case with these guys is we, as you kind of mentioned, Nicole, was like a lunchroom from 11 to 1 or 11 to 1:30. Everybody was invited to come and join and have lunch together and talk and share that space, right? I think one of the things when I suggested to this group too was to slow down a little bit and be very purposeful about the meetings that they were having. Sorry, I just want to make sure I see. Wanted to make sure that these. Sorry. Yeah, okay, Carmen, I see your text. I don't know if you heard me there. Sorry, Carmen did have to leave early. Was to be very more purposeful about agendas for meetings, and that, one topic per meeting, so you didn't overwhelm people by jamming in 62 things in, whatever period of time you were setting up your online call. So what we suggested was, okay, more shorter meetings. One was on HR, one was on a project, one was, and he was very focused. So you didn't let people, because, we've all been in those meetings when we didn't have anything to say and we weren't even sure why the hell we were there. And then if you're in this big international or across Canada, across the United States Zoom meeting and you have no idea why you're there, it is easy just to disconnect and log off. So I think part of the thing I would suggest is that, and I did suggest to this group, was to be very purposeful of why you're bringing people together, and ensuring the agenda was something that drove a little bit of interest. And then the other thing is, how do you manage that call, right? So like we would, part of it was a coaching thing with the people that were running the calls, was actually calling on people in order, changing up the order so they didn't always know it was coming next, but it would be like, okay, I'm going to call on Nicole to speak to this, and then Morgan, and then after Morgan will be Bob, sort of thing. So people, I want to say it sounded, I was going to say coerced. I don't think that's the fair way to say it, but they were, incented to be a little bit alert and on top of it. I don't know what's your thoughts of those things, but
I think that, and I think we've tried everything, right?
Yeah.
To make everything work, have a shorter meeting, camera on, camera off, listen, that sort of thing. But you lose what I used to call like the drive-by. Right. You when you're in office, like, and for Morgan's fortunate that she can ask somebody right then and there. And now we've created this, and I can't speak for everybody, but there's this turn of phrase that's the last thing anybody wants to hear. And it's, can you just jump on a quick Zoom?
oh my gosh.
That is now the Zoom version of what would have been a drive-by. Somebody knocking at your cubicle door. Hey, do you have a quick second? And for some reason, it hasn't been embraced the same way. And I think it's because I don't know if it hasn't, we haven't earned it as that same, or it's not defined the same. But you can have shorter meetings, but you still have to make sure that not every minute is accounted for, so that you can have that capacity for, can I just quickly ask kind of thing, because you lose your people's engagement if they don't have that's I don't want to call it spontaneity, but if they don't have an outlet for that quick learn, right?
Right.
If everything has to be a structured agenda setting kind of thing, that's not everyone's style for getting information. And so I think a good leader, whether you're in person or online, realizes how people take in information and recognizes that you can't be one Zoom for all people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, it's like meetings in general, but more so is like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about, and this is the agenda, this is the outcome we're trying to get, and you're welcome to join us if you have something to add. Like to engage people in a different way, as opposed to, yeah, like you say, forcing everybody into the room or onto a Zoom. Because that's the thing you do. But here's the agenda, here's the thing, and this is a conversation. And if you have something to add or you're interested. Now I know not all meetings can be like that because some are proprietary or confidential. But if they're more open, and that way you're not punishing somebody by forcing them to join a meeting that they really don't have anything to think about or you maybe not care, which is that's another conversation around meetings. But the other one too is I think we all, part of it is we have to leadership is a profoundly human exercise. We need to slow down at the best of times. And I think in this circumstance, what I coach people to do was to slow down even more. Like you really have to take your time and be thoughtful about what you're doing and when you're doing it. Because human beings are human beings. And if you're treating the agenda, managing the agenda and walking through the entire agenda, if that's the outcome you're trying to achieve, that's not very engaging, right? So what's the purpose of the meeting? What's the outcomes we expect to have achieved at the end? And why should you be there? And I think some people are nosy. We've all bumped into those folks and they want to be part of the meeting because there's a meeting going on and I don't want to miss it. But if they have the freedom to come and go or join, then I think too that's a different conversation. I know in Morgan, your setting, you have lots of meetings scheduled. And what's your thoughts on just the meetings in general?
My thoughts on her mentioning the Zoom, jumping on Zoom isn't as well viewed as just popping into the office. I think it feels like another task as well. Like they're trying to do their work and you're asking them to go onto Zoom now. It feels more like another task than you're passing someone's office and you go, hey, by the way, I just thought of something that we should talk about. We have weekly meetings and we're always walking around the building, chatting with each other as we think of things that someone else should also know. But that's my views on the Zoom is it would just feel like another task. Like, oh, now I got to jump on Zoom, trying to do my work. Now there'll be another thing.
No, and I think you're totally right. I feel that it's just like, it's not quick. Just the sheer, oh, I gotta go and I gotta do and I gotta there's steps to what would have been a knock and a talk, right? Yeah. And so like, are you setting it up? Are you sending me a link? Am I suddenly exactly. It's now an overthought organic situation. And so I agree that it can be, and I think that's probably what's done it worst damage is another task to participate in a quick call. Can you just quick?
Yeah. And it's not quick, right?
Not quick.
Well, even office chats aren't always quick. They're often not, but it feels less forced than hopping on Zoom.
Yeah. It happened as opposed to like, okay, well, I'll send you a link and in 5 minutes, like now suddenly you're planning and you're, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and there's an expectation that you're going to, you have something to participate. You're bringing something to the table, right? And there's like you're almost taking on an onus on what you're trying to achieve there, as opposed to that. Like sometimes when you have that coffee break conversation, it's natural and it's unforced, and sometimes wonderful things come out of it, and other times it's just an enjoyable time. But when you're, like you say, Morgan, if you're tasked with jumping on a quick Zoom right now, it's like, oh my God. And then there's other things, right? I don't know about, maybe it's a gender thing, but it's like, like my wife hates not being startled with a Zoom, right? There's an expectation of looking at least respectable, whereas, that's maybe a male privilege where you don't care, but I think too, there's that thing too, is does my backdrop look good? Do I have my act together? Especially when you're in somebody's home, right? You're looking, often now we're talking to somebody in their home, and it's like, it's intrusive.
And that's the thing too, is you've given me the freedom to do my work, and now you are interrupting my freedom. You are restricting it by just simply this one task. And so, but I think you're right about the slow down. I think that we've made this assumption that we can duplicate everything about in person simply by trying. And that's not. And so we can't make that. And so we do have to slow down. It will take somebody longer to do something. It will take them longer to jump on, all of those sorts of things. And so I think slow down in terms of speed, but also slow down in terms of expectation. Just be okay that things are going to take more time. People are going to be I just feel that there's a different pace right now. Work is getting done. Energy is different.
For sure, yeah. But like I say, I just, I did coach these guys, they got better at it, but it's like, try to make it more human, right? And slow down a little bit more. And, in the case of, if you go back to the previous case for Joanne, like, the thought of just if you were in the old days when everybody generally was in the same kind of work environment, workplace, the thought of not talking to somebody for a week would be horrifying, right? Even to check in to make sure they're doing okay, and all those little simple human things. I think Nicole, I don't know if you can hear that. There's a lawnmower just out the front of the window here, so it might be a bit of background noise. But those human things, like, how was your kids? Last week you mentioned some of your kids are in a soccer tournament, or whatever. It's like to have that conversation that people understand that we are still human beings, and I do think I love technology. I think it's all wonderful, but I do think the least amount of dimensions you're exposed to another fellow human being, the least you start to think of them as people, right? They become two-dimensional, one-dimensional.
If you'd been checking in with Joanne or gathering and thinking about people, I bet you it would have been brought up like, hey, how are we doing with replacing your role? Yeah. Right? Like that would have been on an agenda if you would have been talking to your team.
Exactly.
And people. You would have been like, hey, I'm thinking about can I fire you some resumes to look at or something, like there would have been dialogue. So I think to blend these two cases, Joanne's team they weren't engaged, whether it was by above or at that same level. And they obviously had a culture where that was okay.
Yeah, for sure. So it was, in both of these cases, it was an organizational culture that was causing these issues, right? Not necessarily a personal, individual values thing. Like people are being put in a position that they're being set up for maybe failure, but certainly not success, to be able to step through it a little bit. So I would recommend to everybody that when you're in a situation, even in person, but more so if it's virtual and remote, is to take that extra time and slow down that extra step. I've really got to the place when I do counsel people and coach them and advise them about, meetings and stuff, is okay, like really, what it should be like one thing, one meeting, one thing, one subject, not a range of subjects that cover from soup to nuts, because then everything becomes equally valuable. And then if everything has the same value, then nothing is important, right?
Yeah. And you don't tune in because you're universally tuned out.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's the number of things that I don't really care about is quite astounding. And
Yeah.
if you ask me to sit through a meeting about something like that, it's a hardship for me. So I can get it. So the next one is fun. Are you ready?
All righty.
All right. So the clash of faith and workplace. How interesting. So this is changed to protect the innocent, but threw in a hotel. So you're the supervisor at a hotel, and you are responsible for coordinating and supervising the front desk and welcoming staff of the organization. And major urban center with many of the front staff are Muslim, and they've been asking for Fridays afternoons to attend prayer. About a third of the staff fall into this category of Muslims. But it's also because it's a hotel, Fridays are busy days, a lot of check-ins for the weekend and stuff like that. But as could maybe likely be expected, a lot of staff are asking for this time off to do prayers, and the non-Muslim staff are starting to get upset because they're thinking, well, I should have time for Friday afternoons for my needs too. How would you manage this? So in most places, there is a law that says employers have to accommodate a sincerely held belief, such as a religious belief, and accommodate other things for people as best you can. So what do you think about how we're going to manage? How would you approach this as a leader and a supervisor in an organization?
I have no idea. This is so out of my realm of.
So let's just bounce
Are your staff, back to the previous slide, like, I guess, is it full-time staff? Like, is it
it's shift work.
Industry.
It's 24. It was a 24-hour. It was it wasn't a hotel, but it was basically an organization where people were coming in.
Right, but would you be
hours.
on shift?
Yes.
Like, so you could potentially, and I don't know, but is there a chance that instead of scheduling people on a Friday and then they need to take it off, rotate it so that they're not on Friday? Yeah. I don't know. I've never done shift work. I don't know. But instead of scheduling them for a Friday afternoon and then having them say, I need Friday afternoon off, can it be that they get their hours in on a different schedule? I don't know. So
I'll actively facilitate this one a little bit because it might be new to some. So one of the things, one of the first things we did was to make sure people understood what was happening and why, so that all of the staff were sort of brought up to the cultural awareness of the requirements for some people. But one of the things that I coach these guys to do, because I bumped into it myself in a completely different setting, was we brought in an imam to get advice. Like, what do people require and need? What is reasonable to give people? So for example, and the reason I came up, it was kind of I don't know if it was a funny story or not, but it kind of made me laugh. Like, so during Ramadan, the Muslim faith, you eat before sunrise. You don't eat between sunrise and sunset. Yet in northern Canada, that's a long time. So even in Calgary, right? It's in the summer. It's like whatever, almost like 5 in the morning to 10 at night. And so what we did was we went to an imam and asked their advice, and what the advice council was that it's just reasonable. So they picked Toronto Eastern, basically the Toronto time for sunset and sunrise. So it was manageable, so people didn't go 16 hours without anything to eat.
Right.
And so what we did in this case, we brought in an imam, and they laid out what was, yes, people required, observant Muslims required a space and a time for prayers, but they didn't all have to go at the same time.
Okay.
They could be managed, and some could be done within a private prayer room where they were able to
Mhm.
do their prayers, so they didn't have to attend a mosque and things like that. So the leveling effect that I would suggest for us, if we were in that situation and not necessarily always fully aware of the religion and the requirements of that religion, is to level ourselves and get some good advice before
Yeah.
we try to implement some change. And in this setting, people just, for the most part, most of the people required, all they required, that's probably not fair to say, but what they required was a place to pray. They didn't have to leave the building to go and do it. Some were more, like in all faiths, there's some that are more observant than others, and so they were allowed, those ones were scheduled around, so they had the time to go to the mosque for prayers, where others
Right.
were given this opportunity space. And it was also a learning opportunity that people, the non-Muslim staff were, all of the staff were brought in and then given orientation and education and a level of knowledge of what this meant and why it was done this way. And then we also coach people to consider, okay, it's so the people of the Christian faith, Christian background, even though you're not, maybe not even observant, you get all of these religious holidays that have become stat holidays and just general culture, but they come from a place of faith, right? So instead of you having to work Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, the Muslim staff are there to cover those days off, or Easter, or whatever it might be. So we were able to manage people's expectation around what this meant, and that there was trade-offs, and that there was a tit for tat in a way that people were able to manage. And so I don't know what your thoughts are, if you got any consideration now that we walked through it a little bit.
I think that it would be important, like you said, to bring in your subject matter expert. You know, this is an education opportunity, and so you can't assume that you know it. You have to make sure that you're presenting knowledge that's accurate. And then I think it's a little bit, and I don't want to use the word messaging, but it's not like it's time off to not do anything, right? Like they're asking for a time and a dedicated window, and I'm glad that you were able to find ways to make it work. I guess the biggest thing would be like that clear communication of actual information, right? That would be the one thing, regardless of the issue, would be to make sure that you are clearly communicating the accuracy. Like, okay, this isn't that somebody's coming in and then leaving early, or
Right.
this isn't that, it's like they're just sitting around, like it's the opportunity for them. And I like that you equated it to things that people could understand, like the holidays and the stats and that sort of thing. You want to find a way that people can connect to new material, right? And so I bet you not everybody I bet you there's a huge, and this is an assumption, but I bet you there was a portion of that staff that assumed that these folks were just choosing to not work on
Right.
Friday afternoon, and therefore imposing the workload on somebody else. And so if it was seen as just like not pulling their weight, that's going to do resentment, and that's going to do, dislike. And so that opportunity to communicate that this isn't about workload, this is about personal choices and everyone having them. I think that would be your key for communication.
Yeah.
It's the same now with work from home, and you've got somebody who's doing like school drop-offs. So they're asking you to not schedule a meeting while they're in carpool kind of thing, right? And it's about being respectful, but it has to be communicated that that's why they can't come at that minute and that time kind of thing.
Well, people can tolerate a lot of things as long as they feel that it's fair, right?
Yep.
As soon as people start thinking somebody's getting something that I'm not, and it's not fair, then it becomes a problem.
Exactly. Yep.
Right? Even if it's not pleasant, like, I don't know what it could, sort of stepping out of this particular case, but even if it's something not pleasant, that people have to do work that's not pleasant or whatever it is, but as long as they think, oh, everybody's being treated the same, well, then it's okay. One of the examples I would probably use was an engineering firm that I work with quite some time ago, and that was tough. I was 20 for those of us in Alberta in particular, in sort of oil and gas world that's impacted by oil and gas. It was 2015 when the price of oil dropped down, and things were pretty tough for this firm, and they were asking people to take I think it was a 10%, if I'm not mistaken, a 10% pay cut. And but my advice to the leadership team, the owners of the group and the partners of the group, was that you should take a 15% pay cut. Not to, just to set the example that you're taking a different level. Trust me, the difference between the pay scales, 10% of one guy's pay was not the same as 10% of the partner's pay, right? It was a bigger hit for the lower income people to lose 10% than the partners, because if you went from 200 to 180 or you went from 20 to 18, that's a big deal, right? So what we did was we just made sure it was not just fair, but extraordinarily fair, better than fair for people, so they felt that I could absorb this hit, and I see other people are doing it too. And in this case, with the matter of faith, it was like, okay, but you get this is what you're getting because you are part of this other sort of waspy Western sort of Canadian historical culture. You get a lot of benefit and stuff, and we just had to frame it in a way that was not rubbing anybody's nose in it, but being extraordinarily respectful about it all. And also bringing them on, and he was a cool guy, man. Like, he was funny and charming, and he actually brought his rabbi with him. And so they had this whole conversation about what the faiths were and how they matched up and how it matched up with the Christian faith. So they were able to have this very interesting conversation about what these things meant and how they meant. So actually, the line I remember best, I think it was a rabbi said, you Christians, he says, you do 1 hour of church every Sunday, and we go until we're done, so we might be there for hours. So everybody relaxed. But it was kind of a funny way he put it. But yeah, so I think that's, I think there's two things I would identify mostly, and Nicole, you addressed some in your comments. Was the number one thing is about it has to be fair. It has to be presumed and assumed to be fair to everybody. So if somebody's getting something, people need to understand that they're also getting something of equal value, or at least be treated the same when it comes to their circumstance. The opportunity to educate people in something that's a little different and outside of their normal lives is always of value. You can't always do that. And then there's another thing here too, that I think there was people that were not happy with it and would never be happy with it because of their background and their history and their personal belief and values. And I think it's like, okay, so if you can't, this is our values for our organization, and this is how we want to conduct ourselves and show the world how we behave, and you can't align yourself with these values, so we need to make a different choice here and allow you to be in a situation where it aligns with your values, and it may not be here, right?
Go be cranky elsewhere.
Yeah. We want you to be happy, but you can't do that here, right? So I think too, that's another tough part of this level of conversation. If somebody can't get behind it, well, maybe this is the place for you.
Yeah.
And it's 2013, Matt. It's a very complex, nuanced, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-everything world, and we need to figure out how we're going to get behind it. And you get behind it or you don't. So I think in this case, there was some changes made, not with the frontline staff, but with other staff who just were not very nice about it all. Any thoughts?
It goes back to that second statement where there's still people. Everybody on your team is a person.
Yeah.
And so if that gets lost, what is the point?
Yeah.
You're not leading, pylons, you're leading people.
Right, exactly. Morgan, do you have anything to add? Because I know you have a very interesting workplace there with lots of people in it.
No, everybody here seems to be, they think they're treated very fairly, and I would agree that if they ask for something, it's usually accommodated and also explained why it was accommodated and the need for it, so everybody is understanding and doesn't just judge for no reason.
Thanks. So we're kind of wrapping up towards the end. This is the third case, and I think it was super interesting because it reflects the modern world, and sometimes we tend to hope things work out on their own. And unfortunately, in reality, they don't always just kind of work out on their own. And as leaders, it's our role to sort of walk into that and have that could be an uncomfortable conversation, but also a respectful conversation to make sure everybody is aligned with the values of the organization. So based on the three cases that we talked about, and I know we're still a pretty small, little tight group here today, and Carmen had to step away for an international call, as she mentioned earlier. So I will ask each of you in turn. I'm going to start with Morgan first, because she's just to put her on the spot a little bit, make sure she's not sleeping there in her. What's something that you took away from any of the cases this morning that allows you to think differently, or maybe be a better leader, or consider leadership differently as you go forward? What was something, is there a lesson you take
I
out of
really
this?
liked Carmen's do it, delegate it, delete it.
That's a powerful 3 words, isn't it?
It is, and I try very hard to make sure my team feels comfortable with their jobs, but also feels like they're challenged, and I'm not just doing everything that they want to be trying for themselves, because we do a lot of art projects for the creation studio. Before I pick my projects, I generally ask my team, what would you like to take on? So I try to delegate as much as I can. And some things it's just, I'm going to do it because it needs to get done now, and I don't have time to explain to someone else how.
Right. So one of the things that on the delegation side, I think is important. So there's 2 times you want to actually be a micromanager when you delegate. One is if they're new in the role, and one is if it's risky or dangerous or hazardous to the person or to the organization. So if it's something they want to try and there's no harm, no foul, no one's going to get hurt, the organization isn't going to suffer, they want to try it, and I think that's a fair game. But I think as leaders, I think we also have to be very conscious. Oh, sorry, there's a third one, which is performance management, right? Somebody's struggling in the role. That's like poor Joanne here. She really needed someone to be on with her, supervising her and supporting this person as she went through this experience. And can you imagine her waking up one day and thinking she's been doing a great job, but finding out 6 months later, 2 months later, that she was doing a terrible job, or worse, knowing she wasn't doing a good job, and going to work every day fearful that she was going to get fired. What a horrible place to put situation with somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
For the safety thing, a lot of what we do is teamwork because of safety. We're up on ladders, we're up high, so it's a lot of teamwork in those situations. But just for projects in the back that are painting or whatever, if you want to paint it, go ahead and do it.
Yeah, and you know what? The other thing I would say to that too is, like, just because I think I could do it better, but what you could do is good enough, right? So as long as you're clear about the expectation.
Have much more experience than I do, so I can't even say I can do it better. It's you want to do it, you probably can do a better job than I can.
Well, so exactly. Yeah.
As long as it looks good enough, everybody's fine with that on my team.
Nice. How about you, Nicole? What's a couple of things, something different than what maybe I know that really resonated with everybody, but what was there something you want to take away from this?
I think that much to that point, if somebody can do or wants to do, make sure that you provide them the opportunity, because I think learning is super important. But then I think to this case, like this last case about like the faith-based, recognizing also that just because I'm a leader doesn't mean I have all of the information. And so being okay with saying, I don't know either, just a second, and not putting on a facade of leadership equals knowledge. you know, especially like you look at Joanne in her position, and we still don't quite know how she got there, but she obviously knew how to do her old job. Did she know how to do her new job? I would have never in a million years been able to figure out on my own independently how to solve this last case, kind of thing, right? So I think it's about making sure that every opportunity to learn, whether it be delegated so someone can learn, or realizing that you yourself don't know, is necessary in that whole team triangle.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very powerful, succinct statement you made. Like, really, like, how good do we think we are that we know everything there is to know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, name one person, right? Nobody. But yeah, I guess too, like, you know, it's like that pride goeth before the fall too, right? Because you don't want to admit. And then how much trouble could you be in if you mess this particular case up? Organization could get sued, human rights complaints, there could be lawsuits, there could be a reputational suit if you're, this was a very, like in the setting here, we called it a hotel, but this organization was a very public facing organization. And, you know, the reputational hit would have been unbelievable if you would have come off as a thoughtless, racist bunch of arseholes, right?
And I think you always just want to imagine yourself, would you have felt comfortable asking to learn more? And so if you know, like, I think you gotta build the environment that you wish you had.
Yeah. Well, that's a great line too. Wow, there's some great lines. I'm gonna have to hopefully copyright them because I might actually slip them into something here as we go forward. Those are great lines. Yeah, so on the next question, and I know it's a small group live today, but was this of value? Like, would you like to see more of these, or more, maybe one per session where we had an actual case study where we have the group learning and everybody's wisdom together?
I'd love it. I'd love one per.
First, like, to focus on a subject, maybe more directly on something. Yeah. Well, that's terrific. Well, I certainly will be factoring these in because it was fun thinking back over some experiences too, a little bit. Going, oh yeah, right. And as you know, like my clumsy version of the earlier quote is, you know, like a smart man learns from his mistakes, but a wise one learns from others. So I think you know, we need to take. I think it behooves all of us as leaders to be able to take a few minutes and kind of measure that out and make sure we're getting the good examples from everybody. So we're winding up a few minutes early, but we're winding up close to the end of our time together. And so I'd just like to remind everybody that on Thursday, October 19th at 11 Mountain is our next session. And I wish I could tell you off the top of my head that I can remember what it's about, but I can't. I'll send out a note with everybody with the link to the this morning's session, and also I'm going to try to experiment and see if I can bookmark the various times within the recording of when the different case study conversations started, because I know there's a process to do that on YouTube, but I just can't do it. So it's going to be a learning experience for me on this. And to everybody, I wish you nothing but the best. Thank you very much for your time this morning and your participation. And I look forward to seeing you in a month's time at the next session of the Better Learners Inner Circle. Take care, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks. And for those who are listening to the recording, we're fun people, and you should take the time to join us because we have these rich and great conversations. So once again, thanks very much, everybody, for being part of the Inner Circle. I hope it was of value, and I hope you nothing but the best. And if you can, try to be kind to yourself. And if you have the space and energy to be kind to somebody else, what a wonderful day that would be. Take care. Thank you very much.